But before we start, a big trigger for the evening, and I apologise, I'm standing right in front of Wendy, which no one should ever do. But Wendy is going to lead us off a little bit in conversation with Simon, just to give us a bit of a flavour, because one of the key prompts for making this event happen this evening was this utter thing of beauty. The book Everyday Citizenship, 7 Keys to a Life Well Lived, of which these two are the co-authors. And I'm just going to hold up a couple of these pages and point them at Eddie for the camera, because any page you open, you get...
Number 7.
Do number 7, all right. What's number 7? Wendy likes this one. We're going to get some trouble from this one. I can't find it, Wendy. You'll have to do it yourself.
People get abused, and that's the point I want to get across.
Well, I'm going to let you do that in just 1 second. I just want to hold up. These pages are beautifully illustrated and wonderful storytelling in this thing. So I would highly recommend checking this out. But before I say any more, I'm going to let these two introduce you to the book, and then we'll roll into the wider conversation. Does that feel okay? Feels okay. Let's go.
I'm not going to say much other than Wendy. Do you want to, so we've been working together for ages around this book, earlier formations of the idea of citizenship, the 7 keys to citizenship. But what actually do you value in the idea of being a citizen?
Because you're just out there and you can do what you want. In the past, people have told people what to do, but they don't tell me what to do, which is kind of how people should live. And people learn from making mistakes, like you would learn from making mistakes. We have the right to make mistakes. Why is there always a question? And why do we always have to prove where you don't? There's the first time, can I tell a story?
Yeah, go.
The first time I started doing this work, I had to have an assessment before I could go around doing this work, and I said no, because I'd already got the job, and I'm going to start tomorrow. But they go, but it's dangerous, you need an assessment. I went, too bad, I'm going. So I just started the job, and the first thing we did, the first contract I did, we got stuck in the river.
You've not told me this story.
I haven't told you. I haven't told you this one. And this is not how I normally start a job. But we got stuck, and you know who with?
Nigel?
Ni-
Peter?
Nigel.
Yeah, Nigel.
We got stuck. We didn't know which way to go. But we got out at the end of the day, and that day they didn't know. They thought he was coming on his own. They didn't know I was coming. But that day they got to know what people should do, and me and Simon met, didn't we? How this all started. We met first, and he said that we should work together.
Yeah, and I think we won't go through the whole book and everything, but one of the key things that Wendy's helped me with is, this is actually a kind of third version of a book that was first published in 2003. And if you go back to that, what you find is the language is a little bit more technical, jargon, boring, weird.
Oh,
like
now
looking
you've
back,
decided that.
and so one of the things Wendy's done is definitely kind of get us back to the basics. And one of the things Wendy's just been talking about is really freedom. What is citizenship about? Freedom. And it's interesting how we lose sight of the value of these really fundamental aspects of everyday citizenship. So
I learn, and people will learn by doing it. Don't tell them what to do. Let them do what they want, and let them learn by their mistakes.
So we encourage you to go to Catherine at the back and buy a book, please.
Please.
Because we need you to, so that'd be really nice. And they're not expensive, and they are very beautiful, illustrated by our friend Esther Ortega from Madrid. And yeah, shall we let John take over, Wendy? Yeah. All right then.
Shall I grab that mic off you? Thank you, Wendy. Let's give Wendy a round of applause, folks. Mini elegant stage remanagement by Simon Duffy. And I just want to say a few things to frame the next bit of the conversation as Martin Sibley slides into place as well. A lovely beginning to this idea of freedom and actually letting people make their own mistakes and learn from them. And we're going to come back, I think, to that probably almost as the crescendo of this before we hand over. But the question we're going to be holding, what can we collectively learn about democracy from those living with disability? And what can we personally do with that learning? I want to say a couple of things just to frame, and maybe a couple of caveats or apologies almost, we're doing our level best to make this a really accessible event, live out what we're trying to do. And so you've got the closed captions on the screen behind us. There's someone who I really would have loved to have been part of this conversation, someone who really inspires me, a woman called Kat Fraser, who I know is watching online, who is deeply affected by ME and chronic fatigue off the back of COVID, and has been organising in that community, and she's a real pioneer. And there are some people who can't be here even with the adjustments we've made, and I think that's sort of important to recognise. Yeah. I also want to apologise because I do my level best not to put on manels. And we've got 3 white men in front of you, so sorry for that. Wendy obviously led us off in true style, but to say a word seriously about that, I think most of the people I'm talking to in these adventures in democracy draw on very different backgrounds, but in some ways I think these two have helped me see this world and learn through the lens of disability, because maybe they are a bit more similar to me in very different ways. And so by way of introduction to each of them, so Simon Duffy, first, Simon's going to be mildly embarrassed. I consider Simon a real kind of mentor and forerunner in the work I try and do in the world. So my work is all about seeing people as citizens. I wrote a book called Citizens. It's all about inviting people into a story of ourselves where actually by tapping into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone, that's how we build a better world. And Simon has been doing that work for so long, and I admire it so much. He's one of the people I have learned most from in this space. He's also the holder, I love this, he drops it into conversation sometimes. Simon's the holder of the RSA's Albert Medal. Now, I encourage you to look up the Albert Medal, because this is bonkers, right? Simon follows in holding the RSA's Albert Medal Alexander Fleming, the Queen Mother, and Francis Crick. So I think we've got some company here, Martin. He's also the founder of a really wonderful network of organisations called Citizen Network. So basically Simon rocks. So we're going to get a little Simon. And to our right, Martin Sibley. I consider Martin a kind of friend, fellow traveller, and basically a sort of version of me who happens to be affected by spinal muscular atrophy. So Simon, we're basically the same age. We both started our careers kind of working in marketing and communications, and have been sort of digging at the edges of where that works and turning from thinking of people as consumers to thinking of people as citizens. And I love the way you introduce yourself. He's basically bonkers as well, right? Like serial entrepreneur. Is annoyingly, by claiming that he's a sort of version of me with muscular atrophy, I'm talking myself up way too much, basically, is all you need to know. So we're going to have a conversation first where we're going to go in 2 kind of movements. We're going to start talking a little bit about what can we learn, or how do we see democracy from where we are as a society at the moment. And I think that might be sort of, yeah, there'll be some really interesting things to take from that. But then we're going to move into, and what if we look back at democracy as it is now from where we might be? And that, I think, that's gonna be some juicy stuff as well. So there are going to be those two movements to the conversation, and then we're going to invite you guys to have a bit of a chance to reflect, hear some soundings from your conversations, share some thoughts, make it as conversational as possible. Does that feel all right? There's a few nods even before I asked if that feels all right, so I think we're going all right. So I'm going to come to you first, Martin. Maybe you could just, I've obviously said a little bit about you, but maybe you can just describe a bit of your journey and take us through the way what you've been doing, what you've been building from within the world as is.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. I guess there's three core areas I wanted to kick off with. So the social model of disability, I think, and Henry's in the audience, that goes back to our Scope days. We haven't seen each other in about 15 years. One of my first job was at Scope. And so I was born with my disability. I had my first wheelchair when I was about 3 years old. And going through childhood, I suppose the best way to describe was I tried to, within the fact I needed a wheelchair, within the fact I needed care support, I tried to assimilate, to not have my disability affect how others viewed me, and I tried to assimilate within to how society was. And that's not good or bad, that's my experience. But what I started to realize as I got a bit older was there was maybe a bit of a sub-feeling and sub-messages from media and society that it brings us in something called the medical model, which was way back. Disability was very much, if the medical side couldn't be cured, you would be put in an institution in the countryside. So I was born in the 80s, which meant I did go to mainstream school. So fortunately, we did progress more from the decades when that was the case to me going to mainstream school. But there was a lot of baggage and history of these kind of messages in society. So when I worked at Scope and when I learned about the social model, which try and sort of put like days of trainings that can be run into one sentence, the idea is that I am disabled by societal barriers that are environmental, attitudinal, and procedural. Now, it doesn't take away, of course, I've still got SMA, I still have to deal with health things and, work things out with my disability. But if cities were designed with, for example, wheelchair users in mind, we would not have some of the barriers that inherently are in physical spaces. And with that kind of where we came from of institutionalization, people wouldn't be as scared or prejudiced as some people can be about disability. So that's the attitudinal. And when we look at business policies and government policies, again, not many disabled people were starting and running businesses and in government. So the whole point of this social model was I didn't feel like that I was the problem here, but there was a way to look at solutions. It wasn't to be a victim or to become angry at society, but it was a framework where, well, if there are these barriers, we can work to remove them. And then I'll have spinal muscular atrophy, but I won't be disabled, inverted commas, because there won't be any barriers. So that's sort of trying to simplify the whole social model thesis. And so I think that opened up a lot, not just for me, but then around community and activism and entrepreneurship. So the second area is the sort of business economic case of inclusion. Some people might have heard of the purple pound and these kind of marketing-y advertising narratives that you were talking to earlier, John. But that opens up possibilities again, because if businesses see disabled people as consumers, which we'll move that forward, but there's a reason for a business to make goods and services more accessible, more inclusive, because that's a whole group of customers that are currently being left out. When I read your book and light bulbs came on.
Stay there for a moment, though, because before we start our mutual appreciation
Yeah,
society.
yeah.
But
Did you know John wrote a book? It's
it's going to take the mick out of me, I promise you. Take us into Purple Goat a little bit more, though. So Purple Goat as an agency, you see this sort of this purple pound phenomenon, the market demand dynamic, and you've lent into that, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to frame around 10, 20 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, there was a broad appreciation for social care packages were better than certainly 50 years prior, and access was improving. So this societal, almost political side seemed to be getting better, but there was this being left out of employment and left out as customers. And so that purple pound narrative gradually took more and more hold the last 10, 20 years. So Purple Go, I co-founded that 2020, so it's 4.5 years old. Another shout out to the audience. Dom has been an absolute warrior on the journey, and we've achieved things beyond the dreams we could have ever had, right, with Purple Go. But we're helping brands understand how to be better for disabled customers and overcoming their fear, overcoming their apprehension, but then doing the tangible, tactical things from a brand perspective that opens up the opportunity of the disabled audience. Obviously, the consequences, you've got more goods and services and marketing that are better for disabled people. So it's a win-win. And so, yeah, that kind of entrepreneurial business side has opened up Purple Goat, which has opened up this how to help brands realize the economic opportunity.
And to key you back in, so in the work I do, the framework I've set out in my book, we talk about a shift from subject to consumer to citizen as the story of the individual in society, and there is a kind of a gradual sort of opening liberation through that.
Yeah.
And I think the way you're describing the sort of the people sent to live in institutions in the countryside, quite a subject story, kind of having stuff done to them. Mm-hmm. The purple pound, that kind of narrative of stuff being done for them. And then I think you were about to launch into your next phase.
Which, under that sort of citizen framework, because you talk in the book, this could still be about brands can still be brands. It's not going all businesses should go away. It's about how the goods and services that people need and want in life can be co-created and more informed by those that use them, rather than that sort of menu of options that you speak about in consumerism. And then I think to that final point, we've also seen a regression in the politics of disability, and everyone in the audience have different views and perspectives, but it's definitely been the last 10 years harder, I think, politically, standard of living for lots of people, not just disabled people, but for disabled people, healthcare has got worse, social care has got worse. It's like even planning cities that are more accessible. When times are good, it's easier to include everyone. When times aren't as good economically, you sort of say, well, that's a nice to have, but maybe we won't. And so I think that's what's brought me a bit back to the activism, campaigning, political side, because that's not, I think maybe we took our eye off the ball a little bit in some sense as a community, because things were getting better. And so I think that's the bit as a community we need to address more concertedly, but without taking the eye off the ball with the business economic side.
And so, and just to bring it up to date, so now you've started Purple Collective. Yeah. Just give us a little flavour of Purple Collective.
Yeah, so a very tangible example was around airlines and the problems with medical, like wheelchairs basically being damaged, and people being damaged, including myself. I got injured a year ago being lifted off a flight. And so that's an example where, in theory, airlines, if they were better for disabled passengers, you can speak to, you might have more customers because you open up the market. For whatever reason, that's just not working. In economics, we call it market failure. So that's when you need legislation, and there isn't legislation. So then you need organising and activism and campaigning with the media to try and get everyone to understand wheelchairs being broken and people being injured is not good in any time, but certainly in 2024, or as we said earlier, you know, we can catch rockets with clever chopsticks, but we can't help someone like myself get on an aeroplane safely. So that's what kind of was the preamble to when you get a lot of people coming together on a topic, you can actually get the media attention, you can get government attention, you can get brand attention. And so the Purple Collective is a platform to unify, and we talked a bit earlier, so I meant not just disabled people, but everybody's voice, that there's no reason that everything shouldn't be inclusive. So that's the big fluffy vision of what the collective is, but then there's like day-to-day tangible things around organising and actions and stuff like that.
And it's a space where you're bringing people together to figure out what together you want to do, right?
Yes. And it's a cooperative, it's very the community decide like what are the campaigns we care about, what are the issues that need solving. So it's not from that sort of historical, someone starts something and they make all the decisions. It's everyone has a vote. It's a very democratic citizen organisation, and the cooperative model as well means that, you know, if and when funding pours in, that's all very much by the community for the community.
And I think you just said everyone's welcome in that, right?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Join the Purple Collective. Woo. Okay, great. And we're starting to introduce you into this, Simon. So you, I mean, I gave you a little bit of a. You now have to be deeply impressive, obviously, with every word you say. But maybe you could just give us a bit of a flavour of your journey to this point and how you've been working for change from within things as they are a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yes. So I suppose time you're going to school or being born, I had my kind of first proper job after packing plastic dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. 1988, I turned up, I was an NHS general management trainee, and I turned up at one of these institutions as part of what was called the Cook's Tour, where you got to see every bit of the NHS. And yeah, it shocked me to my foundations that this is how we were treating fellow human beings. The culture, the building, everything about it was kind of horrible, except the people. I kind of loved the people, like, and then I was shocked at myself to discover that I think I was to have been 23, and like I'd never met anybody with a disability. So this is like the other side of the story in a way. There's like people like me, but I'd gone to a comprehensive school in Durham, and I just never met anybody. I'd not met anybody with an intellectual disability. I'd never met anybody with a physical disability. I'd gone to university, none of those things. So that's the generation I come from. And my training fits you for nothing, but it was in philosophy. So like one of the things that really I wanted to understand, I wanted to try and do something about it. So that's led to the kind of 30-odd year career I've had doing stuff. But I also wanted to understand why we were doing it. And so I think that I don't think it's competing narrative, but I do think it's part of the complexity of the narrative. Like, so there was a great thinker of the time called Wolf Wolfensberger, who actually led a lot of the work on deinstitutionalization, but he talked about the way in which people's social status was undermined by the way social structures were organized. So like the institution didn't just capture people, it kind of presented people back to people in a different way, if that makes sense, and so on and so forth. And then there was another amazing...
So just pausing that, so the institution, people are put in the institution, and then there's a story told about them to the world.
Exactly. I mean, I remember that even as a schoolboy, the only thing I knew about disability was that there was a special school somewhere. It was just a name of a village outside Durham where they went. You knew nothing more. But that's part of a social narrative, isn't it? That there's them that go there. It's also a story of exclusion that you feel even when you can't process it. Yeah. So you know that there are some of you who will go there if you don't do the right thing. Yeah. So. And I think the medical model is part of it, but up from my house in Sheffield, there is a huge building. It looks very grand on the outside, but that was the workhouse, right? And the workhouse became the asylum. The workhouse was about controlling ordinary people in Sheffield at the time of capitalism. So the roots of this aren't just about the medical profession inventing labels and categories. It's actually about social power, class, industrialization, creating systems of power and control over people. And those forces are really still in play. They're still in play in the kind of meritocratic culture of our society, in terms of the elite values that assume some people are better than other people. So that's, I would say there's an even a bigger story than the immediate disability story, which is about power and control. And my work is very much focused on, how do you shift power conceptually? How do you think differently? So that's the appeal of the category of citizen, about each other. How do we think about each other differently? But I've also focused a lot on very practical things, like how can you move economic power into the hands of disabled people?
And with that, so I was really, one of the terms you used to me recently that I, like in my naivety, hadn't really come across before, was this term deinstitutionalisation. And I had thought that must mean, I was like, surely we did that, right? Like that was when we stopped having the places outside, the special school down the road in Durham. But that's work that's still ongoing, because you understand that quite differently, right? Or that means
absolutely. I mean, so I'm just back from Spain, where the Spanish government's made a big commitment to deinstitutionalisation, and they understand it a bit more deeply than we do, which is that actually these systems of power and control don't end with a big building. Like, if you move people from a big building into a small building, but you've still got control of them, you put them in a special bus to go to a day centre, back on a special bus what's the difference between that and the institution? That's an institution. And when I started my career in London in 1990, that's what the folk that I was working with, who'd come out of these big institutions, that's what they were experiencing. Now, folk like Martin in the independent living movement were at that point making strong case, and with some success, to regain power. But I think it's fair to say, Martin, that many groups, including people with learning difficulties, were left out of that story. And I had many arguments with friends in the independent living movement. Oh, we're not ready for that yet. And I, from my point of view, everybody counts. Everybody's got to be included. Everybody is a citizen.
Everyone has a contribution to make. Did you want to say a word about that, Martin?
We sort of touched on it a few days ago. We were chatting a bit, and I think it's everyone being contributing. So when you're speaking to represent disabled people, and I can't speak for what went on in the 90s, because I wasn't in that clan. But no, I agree that I think because with the wheelchair user physical, mobility sort of subgroup, it was an easier conversation about with ramps, and lifts, then that's a clear enablement that can be done, but it doesn't excuse or take away that you're asking society to let you as a group in. You have to bring everyone with you on that journey.
So we're sort of in this, starting from where we are, this with the really important work that's including and offering the opportunity, but also enabling the contribution, sort of from where we are. But then I want to shift the conversation a little bit, because when we started sharing this event, Simon posted a quote on LinkedIn, and I saw it, and it actually blew my brain, because I hadn't really anticipated us going quite here. But I want to read it out to you. It's from Judith Snow, who Simon might say a word about in a minute. But the quote, it's a fairly long one, so stay with me, but it's pretty punchy. She wrote, the gift of surviving and growing through change, belongs to the outcast. Ancient writings tell us this, and modern experience confirms it. Living on the edge of chaos changes the people who survive it. She wrote, you become very aware of the value of things ordinary citizens take for granted. Things like having your opinion listened to, having the chance to make a mistake, to be forgiven, and to have the chance to try again, which I think Wendy was speaking very powerfully to. Things like having friends and family who celebrate holidays with you and who will tell their friends they are looking for a job. Living on the margin either burns you out and kills you, or it turns you into a dreamer, someone who really knows what sort of change will help and who can just about taste it, someone who is prepared to do just about anything to bring about change. And this is the great bit. If these dreamers are liberated, if they are brought back into the arms of society, they become the architects of the new community, a community which has a new capacity to support everyone's needs and interactions. But how can this really be, especially since these dreamers still have the characteristics that marked them as outcasts in the first place? So I want to stop there, because this language of actually, it almost, I think, I'm still struggling to articulate this, so I welcome help from you guys, but it feels like the default narrative is of one way we kind of go, well, the central, there's a mainstream and there are margins, and like if we make the mainstream accessible to folk from the margins, it will evolve the mainstream a bit, but broadly it will stay in the same place. And then this language is kind of saying, actually, over there is where the real stuff is. Like, we don't want to bring them in here. We want to bring the mainstream out there, kind of. And it reminds me of there's a famous Martin Luther King quote where he talks about I need to change my work because I'm something like integrating my people into a burning house. And it's this observation that actually the thing that it might not just be about inviting people into something, because that thing might not be that great, actually. So I think I'm starting to articulate that, but Simon,
Yeah, well, no, I think that is very well articulated, and I'll give you a concrete version of this. So in 1994, I was lucky enough to do something called a Harkness Fellowship. So I went to the USA because they'd, in parts of the USA, it had created kind of inclusive education. So that's basically what you're describing, but they were including people with all disabilities. In Denver, they'd closed all the special schools. So I thought, oh, this could be the key. I could work out how, like, if education was differently, then that would set the scene for everything else. And I went to school with Danny and Haley as their kind of assistant, 1 day a week for each. Now, I came back from that experience, and I would say and I still say now, and in fact I think even more, inclusion works. I'm just not sure education works, right? I sat in classes.
inclusion works, I'm just not sure education works.
Yeah, but it's like, I was sitting in classes, I was 29, 30 at this point, with these two wonderful kids. They're okay, friendships are okay, but it's boring as shit. And nobody's really learning anything. I mean, and it's just like a mechanistic thing. And I just think that so much of this is so when I'm talking about deinstitutional, I say we've moved from saying, exactly as you say, really, John, I think you captured it well, get out of this big institution and let's get into the mainstream. That's the dominant rhetoric. But really, if the mainstream isn't working, and what the mainstream is doing is, anyway, it creates forms of institutionalization and power imbalances and injustices. So it's not working. It's even creating the situation where, for many people with disabilities, and there's somebody in the audience, a friend of mine, Vinny here, who has set up an organisation called iDirect, which is supporting people who'd been put in the new institutions that we create because our social care systems failed them. There are 3,000 people in special institutions costing £150,000 a year or more. Yeah, that's created by our society anyway. So it's not really. It's like just a lot of the mechanisms have kind of moved, changed label, and we haven't really addressed the issues of power and inclusion properly. Yeah.
And if so the book and the underlying model of 7 keys to citizenship, because I think I understand it a little bit differently now, having engaged with Judith's work, and you might say a word about Judith, but the ideas there are so the 7 keys to citizenship, this underlying model is essentially a set of 7 things that kind of everyone needs in order to be a citizen, in order to have their contribution unlocked and unleashed, I think is how I would imagine it. And I think when I read Judith's words and engage with those words, I start to understand that actually folks in Wendy or Martin's position have had to sort of fight to figure out how to fulfill those, how to step into those in ways that we can all learn from, I think, is some of what we're saying. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess going back to when I started, those 3 areas around social model, the business economic, and then the citizen side, which is about agency, isn't it, really? So the social model was liberating because I could see if I could get my care package and get my wheelchair, and I could go into buildings, and so that was the like getting out of the margins into the mainstream. And then similarly with the business case, what we do at Purple Goat, it's like if we're being invited in now more than in the past to talk about the goods and the services and even government like policy. So that's the bit that's, like you say, almost the purpose is to get out of institutions, out of the margins, into the middle. But if then when you're, for example, me, I'm in my chair and my amazing PAs like Aga and Liz have helped me get ready for the day and all that side that hasn't always been possible, you then get to the table and all your ideas are ignored or not engaged with, or, you know, brought in as part of a let's keep redesigning how everything can work for everyone. What's the bloody point, right? And so I think that's kind of from that framing of social model and the business case is the citizen bit got me so excited, because then it should be fun, right? It's like how we progress, how we improve things for everyone. But if you've gone through all that adversity and exclusion and struggle to find that it's a bit tokenistic and people sort of pat themselves on the back because they invited you to have a discussion, but they're not really listening to you, that isn't true citizen as the verb. So I don't know how much that lands with you and the audience, but to me that's how I see it, that inclusion is important, but when we genuinely listen to everybody.
And Simon, could you just give people a quick run of the 7 and maybe pick out a favourite, and maybe a learning, a moment when you feel like you understood that one a little differently from some of your engagement?
Yeah, well, I'll probably just start with the last one is love, which actually wasn't in the first version or the second version of the book, and is in the book.
I'm just going to give everyone the 7 so we can.
Well, I can do it.
Simon's
it's all right.
got it in his head.
I haven't forgotten them, John. But you know, so it starts in a way like there is a logic to this, but the ordering is itself kind of for play purposes. But at the centre of it is a sense of meaning. So citizenship starts with actually your life is meaningful, and that's a very unique and individual thing. And then you need to be able to express what's meaningful to you, so that's where freedom becomes valuable to you. So you're actually able to take your life on some kind of journey. But you do need economic resources in order to engage in the world, so you need money. That's the third key. Fourth key is you need help, because we all need help. Something we kind of forget, and it's an interesting how in our society, like I couldn't have been here without a train driver, but we just talk about independence as if we're all suddenly kind of making, so we forget that we're all dependent. We also forget that we can all help other people, that we've all got a role in helping. The fifth key is home, which is not a roof, it's a place of privacy, security, a place you can welcome people to. And the sixth key is contribution, or community, really. Community is how we talk about it. So it's actually all your gifts, all that's meaningful to you, actually only take life as you contribute into community. And in the first version of the book, that was called Community Life. And we did talk a little bit about friendship and love, but really it kind of got a bit hidden. And this is a point that Wendy made to me, and my mum did, both by saying, rather more bluntly, there's nothing about sex in this book. And so actually, in discussion with Wendy, we evolved it into the 7 keys. And love became the last key, but it's also, of course, the first key. And I suppose... And I think this is the point I would like to just stress in this social model and inclusion debate. I think one of the things that people like Judith Snow, she comes from this inclusion movement, which has always sat, she was a woman with extreme physical disabilities. She could only move her thumb. But with the help of her friends, she lived this amazing life where she contributed deep thoughts and also became a champion of the independent living movement in Canada. But I think what Judith stressed in her work and the work of people like John O'Brien and Jack Pierpont and Marsha Forrest, much more than the kind of, if you like, systemic change or let's get wheelchair access, was the relationship change. So in a way, love is always the power here. Like, actually, love is citizenship, really. Citizenship is the clothes that love needs to wear when it's going about its everyday business, you might think. You know, like when we're trying to live with love as equals, then we need these other keys. But really strip it all back, and love is probably the one that should have been there at the beginning, is there because of Wendy and my mum, and really, I think I think we need to talk about a lot more in these conversations. We're always a bit prim and proper. We don't want to talk about how important, relationships are to everything we are.
Love it, thank you. We're going to come to you folks and give you a chance to chat to one another and then share some of your conversations in just a moment. Before we do, I was just thinking as you were going through this, I'm going to reflect on my favourite of those, or the one that I've learnt most about from engaging with folks living with disabilities over the last little while, and maybe invite Martin to do the same, and you might want to mention your lifeboat as well.
Yeah, I was going to.
But, so I'm going to give you the last word before we go to folks. But as you were going through those, that one of help, I think, is one that I've really come to understand differently in recent times. And it's because a place that you introduced me to, actually, Simon, a gang called the People Focus Group in Doncaster, who I thoroughly recommend everyone looks up and checks out, and a man by the name of Glyn Butcher. But as you go into the space that the People Focus Group have, it's essentially a space that anyone can go into and feel welcomed. And on the wall, there's a sign that says, "Everyone is both a helper and needs help." And it just made me, like, I think even after a year or so of talking and writing about this work, I still sort of had thought of myself as going in to help. And Glyn met me there, and he was like, "You all right, mate?" in big Glyn sort of brush fashion, and was asking, and I was like, and I wasn't actually, and I had been sort of girding myself to be all right, so that I could be helpful by being there. And Glyn just sort of knocked me off my sort of stability instantly, which was really annoying of him, but wonderful as well. So that was my moment. I'm going to let you reflect a little bit.
I'll go to the lifeboat in a second. I guess because I think the thing we're offering the audience today is that not in the end disabled people have all the answers that everyone else in the world needs, and almost going from a history of being a bit oppressed or discriminated. We're not trying to flip it upside down. It's that everyone has contributions, disabled, not disabled. Almost let's get rid of the labels, right? But I think what is also true is that when you do live on the margins, you do go through adversity, it does give you a different way of seeing life. There are times with a disability you can feel very vulnerable at times, and you have to be very resilient. And I think some of those experiences that we go through in different ways as a community, it essentially just creates different ideas and different ways of thinking about the world. And so even when we go to that business case, like fundamentally, everything is more rich and better for everyone when we have that voice of everyone. And so I think bringing it to the lifeboat, this
was just the thing we have to throw in, because Martin came up with it the other day, and it was like, because
one thing we skirted around was universal design. So there's an anecdote that if you have steps one side into a building and a ramp the other side, more people will take the ramp even if they don't need the ramp. So there's these kind of things about, there's a bit of a, when you make things accessible, you might make it worse for non-disabled people. That's bullshit. So universal design is a good accessibility prism and thought process. But the thing, I think it was a guy called Philip Connolly said it to me a long time ago, but it was like, imagine you're on your street, and talking about floods, and there's been a lot going on, environmental wise with flooding and awful stuff happening. But his point was, so there's a flood comes in and the whole street's wiped out with the water, but it's almost like, what if someone with a wheelchair had this sort of special lifeboat system, and from being that kind of narrative of like pity and sympathy and all the things we know are evoked around disability, that this dude in the wheelchair that becomes this thingy is able to help everyone in the neighbourhood. Now it's a bit silly and it's a bit abstract, but I think that's what we're feeling for here, is like those experiences of disabled people can actually be really good in this time where everything feels a bit chaotic and a bit of a struggle to try and create things to be improved as we go forward.
Something to hold on to in uncertainty, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Love it. Folks, over to you a little bit. So we're going to give you sort of 5-10 minutes just to chat to one another, and then we'll take some soundings and then invite these guys to offer any reflections on what they hear. Does that feel all right? So the question we're going to invite you, again, it's the same question, but just invite you now with a little bit more stimulus than just turn to each other and have a chat. The question, just to resurface it, what can we collectively learn about democracy, about society from those living with disabilities, and what might we personally do with that? So invite you into that kind of, what might I do with some of this that I'm hearing? Does that feel okay? Have a chat. We'll hear from you in a minute.
Cool. It'd be good to hear can you turn that off? Yeah, there we go.
Okay, folks, if it feels all right, I'm going to invite us back to the room. And I'd love to just hear a few soundings from the conversations if we can.
Thank you.
Kat's got a microphone, so she can come and bring it to you, and we'll hear a few words. Would anyone like to share? Steph, if we come down the front here to start with. And we'll probably hear a few things, or if you guys want to respond to something immediately, then say, but otherwise we'll hear a bit from the room
Yeah.
and then see where we're at. Go ahead.
Thank you. I heard Martin talk about the fact that the disabled have to be resilient, and I'd really love to know what you feel the rest of us can learn from the disabled in order to help us be more resilient, which is something that's a huge up-and-coming need.
Yeah, this subject of resilience, yeah.
Yeah.
You all right to hold that for a minute, or do
Yeah,
you want to go?
I'll hold it.
Top man. Up the back there. Oh, sorry, Simon, do you mind? Oh, yeah, you go first, and then we'll go ahead up the back. Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Hi, Steph. I run a group like that with people who are disabled, and they have also struggled through this disabilities. But one of our interesting questions was, how do we get people who are neurotypical or who are part of how do we create mix the left and the right brain type people together, if you know what I mean, so that we can all work together? How do we? I guess it's a case, yeah, because there are people who have really struggled through their life and are working really hard to create a new way of working, and then there are people who seemingly to us have sailed through, and how do we make those match well? I'm not articulating myself, am I, Carolyn? Yeah, how do we integrate the two? Because the thing that bugs me, and I was a politician, is the short-termism of everything, and also the competition. And you've talked about this in your book, John. It's all about collaboration. There's enough to go around of the things that really matter, and particularly around belonging. And I think if we all get into belonging in a big way, we'll find that we all want the same kind of thing. It's not being scared of any different group of people, because actually, in the heart of things, we all want the same thing, which is to belong.
Thank you. And could you just say one more word about the, or not just one more word, but a few more words about this thing of left brain, right brain, and where you're coming from with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think for the last several hundred years, we have all become more like sort of machine-like, and they want us all to fit into a box, but actually it's the creative, right brain, gentle,
so the sort of the rational and the more creative, the sort of...
And people with neurodiverse people very often have much more of what's going on in the right brain.
Okay.
And that's what we need to nurture, and that's really valuable for society. In fact, OVO said to me, bring us your people with autism, because they're so stunning.
Okay.
Would schools, if schools appreciated that more, we would have a
then might
better
education be a bit
organisation.
less boring, Simon. Very good, thank you for that. So we've sort of got ideas of imagination and creativity and resilience sort of starting to brew here. Let's take one or two more. We'll come down here, and then we can come back to this gentleman.
Hello. So I'm a teacher and I work in a school, and I'd love to know how you feel it could be more interesting.
Very good. Now we're getting direct. And one more. There we go. Little clap for that one as well.
I've just come back from Cambridge, and I met an organisation called Safe Soulmates. They set up because Lizzie said, I want a partner. Lizzie has autism. She's neurodivergent. All the soulmates are neurodivergent. They set up something based on what the people wanted and did it in the way the people wanted, and helped them to be contributors in their new community of friends and sometimes lovers. So maybe it's about the kind of sex bit and about it being safe. Is there a question?
Soulmates. No, it's a
Safe
lovely
soulmates.
story though, but I like it.
They're lovely, but they struggle to be funded because they don't specifically do training or education or this or that.
Right.
They focus on what matters to the people.
Yeah.
About finding friendship and partners safely.
Very good. Makes me think, just while you guys think about where you might want to go, makes me think of some really interesting work that people might want to check out around the concept of human learning systems. This guy, Toby, who started out working in participatory theatre and found it as a really wonderful kind of community building thing that seemed to solve all sorts of problems, and then he could never get funding for it. And what Toby ended up doing was going down a massive rabbit hole and becoming one of the world's leading scholars of government, having been a participatory theatre director, which is a journey, one of those journeys I love. Gentlemen, where do you want to go? Resilience, imagination, creativity, how do you fix education, Simon Duffy? Martin first.
Yeah, I mean, I like where we are now. It seems like a natural progression of almost more specifics, because I think it's easy to say things are not as we might all want them at the moment. World's a bit chaotic, so how do we come together and create a better future? It's easy to say, but it's a bit broad brush comment, isn't it? I think the comment there about the sort of left brain, right brain, but I'm thinking a bit about AI here, and it was something our friend Anne Hawkins had quoted, that do we want things like ChatGPT, AI to, it was like something like to do our creative things so we have more time to wash the dishes, or do we want technology to do the dishes so we have more time to be creative? And I think we just are at this place where science and technology has evolved so far. We've got all these technologies. That's the kind of stuff we need to be talking about. What world does that take us towards? And we want everyone in that conversation. So that just kind of jumped out about that creative and logical, that we all have both capabilities. But yeah, like what's valuable? What, if you look economically, what is valuable? And I think that's something we all need to sit with and think about. But I think we were starting to draw out maybe some of those, what we might say, qualities or characteristics that disabled people have, particularly when experiencing adversity. So to the resilience question, it's sort of some of the specifics I've gone through that made me exercise my resilience muscle. I wouldn't want to suggest others go through it for the sake of it, obviously. But I think at the same time, we don't need to make it like a mystical word. Everybody has challenges in life. And so I think it is just about how we all cope with that human experience of when things don't go how we'd like them to, and when things happen that make us sad or frustrated. And I think I always think of resilience a bit like a muscle. So I would frame it more in that way, rather than people, trying to seek out adversity or something in that direction. But yeah, I just think we're bubbling up lots of these broad qualities that sit within the experiences of a lot of disabled people, are actually what a lot of other people go through. It might just not seem as stark or overt as having your social care funding, cut, and all that sort of entails and creates. I think in the end it's all human life experiences, and it comes back to figuring out what is this, where do we want things to go, and how do we all come together to create it without that getting too singy and songy again.
Very good. Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I'll try and link schools to the thing that came into my mind about how do we all kind of live together in a way, like with more integrity, I think is one way of thinking about it, more respect for the gifts that we have. And I mean, this weekend in Sheffield, we've got and Simon's come in, we've got Fearless Cities, which is 300 or 400 people coming from, some from Europe, but a lot from the north of England and other parts of the country. And it's a celebration of and an exploration of the power of municipalism, is a word that's used in European discourse. You could think of it neighbourhood power, neighbourhood democracy. And in my own thinking, so I've kind of like spent a lot of my life focused on kind of individual power, like how do we make Martin more powerful, or Wendy more powerful, or like people who are excluded from power in some way. But and I still think that's important. I don't want to lose that. But I increasingly think we actually have to pay attention to community in a much more coherent, intentional way. And England is a basket case when it comes to this, right? We don't seem to realise how centralised power is in this country. Like you can't find another country where so much power is here, just down the road from here, all right? Long way from my city, Sheffield, and from Glyn in Doncaster. And not only that, when you go to, say, Sheffield's got a population of 600,000, no other country has such large local authorities. Recently in Sheffield, in order to get the city to accept that there were neighbourhoods, we got citizens to map the neighbourhoods of Sheffield, and we've mapped 147 of those, and Sheffield City Council's going, oh, that's quite interesting. So that's a win. We're happy about that. But there's a point to this, really. How will we recognise people's gifts? Can you recognise gifts at a scale of 600,000? I don't think so. Can you take care of community at the scale of 600,000? I don't think so. I certainly can't at the scale of 55 million or 66 million if you think the UK is a real thing. Yeah? So you need to create, and this is what history teaches, human beings need to be able to find communities of a human scale in which they can do real and interesting things, learn from each other, in which their gifts have real meaning, in which real relationships start to form. So we have to rethink a lot of our social structures back to a much smaller scale. Now, we're again I don't know what your position on this is. My mum was a teacher. She's very glad she's not still in teaching. Many people I know are frustrated by how teaching has seemed to get more manufacturing, less human. I don't know your experience, but that's a stereotype I hear from outside the world of teaching. Sitting in those classes was boring to me and seemed boring those kids because basically it was just, we're going to tell you some stuff. And then the same Harkness Fellowship thing, I went with a civil servant whose job was to create the national curriculum. That really riled me. What the...
Breathe.
Yeah. Why does some civil servant or some politician get to tell my kids that they should be learning about the Tudors?
And this is again when you go to the 55 million level and you're saying,
why
right.
can't at the perfect institution that maps beautifully onto neighbourhoods turns out to be the primary school? So why can't we think about that community structure as a natural way of thinking about our children's future, their learning? Why can't we think about the 4,000 or 5,000 people in that community as teachers? Why can't we think about the destiny of those kids in their community as the object of what education is about? Why is the Department of Work and Pensions spending billions on a work programme that's completely pointless when you could have invested all that money in the neighbourhood so we could take care of our kids and make sure that they had jobs locally, rather than having to come to London to get a job?
And if you...
Chippy Northerner.
You're never allowed here again. And if you do that, then the contributions of those living with disability are more visible as well, I guess, as some of
everybody, you start to see that everybody's got something to offer, and that becomes invisible in the structures that we've seen.
Got you. And it just maybe as a closing word, it sort of comes back to resilience as well, right? So at a societal level, maybe more than an individual level. I was the other night, Tuesday night, I was part of an event where Caroline Lucas, former leader of the Green Party, gave a lecture about the state of the world, essentially, and this idea that actually adaptation, resilience, climate resilience, and you mentioned what's going on in Spain right now, the flooding, kind of begins with community and neighbourhoods, just you're making me clue this back to the sort of thought experiment of what if we could recalibrate something like a mission to have clean power in this country by 2030 to be something that actually neighbourhoods were leading and neighbourhood scale energy organisations, but then there's something brewing right now.
Can I quickly riff off that as well?
I think you should do that.
The thing we briefly touched on was my recent attempt into local politics, and I guess it just pulls all this together that, you know, there's all these things I've been involved in personally, travelled to a lot of countries through accessible tourism, seen how different countries cater for disabled people as citizens, but also how when tourism comes in, suddenly things can be sped up around accessibility because of the Purple Pound, all this kind of stuff. But I loved what you said, and I live in a town of 16,000 people, and I'm going around and I see things that not just for me or just for a wheelchair user, but people with learning disabilities, people neurodivergent. We're talking to the question we had about neurodiversity. And so, yeah, what if we can, within a smaller community, figure out how that all actually works? And then you don't have to do the top down. It comes about bottom up, just very naturally and organically. So I'm not saying that's the answer to everything, but I feel there's something in that, so much so that I applied to be co-opted and onto the local council, almost got in, can't say I got in, it's a bit of a sad ending to the story, but the story's not over. I will get on the council next time.
Nothing that tries to keep Martin out is ever
exactly. To draw that to a close, for me, the word representation. And we need, when we talked about difference in the break, didn't we? And I think we need to be not scared of difference as people, which we're arguably genetically programmed to be from a survival biological instinct, but we need to get over this fear of difference and have true representation. And I think that's where a lot of the answers come from.
Lovely. On that note, my friends, the bar is open upstairs, and I think there's a few drinks here as well. Please do continue the conversation. The spirit of these events, this Adventures in Democracy series that I'm hosting and running here, is really trying to inquire into, like, what really is this thing we call democracy? It definitely isn't just elections and big stuff, because that doesn't feel like it has any really meaningful bearing on really people having power, and exploring that from different angles, and it keeps coming back to this thing where ultimately it's like, get involved, right? Like we're going to have to lean in, get involved, and shape it, and this shift to community, I think, is such a profound thing. So thank you for joining us. I hope you feel like you've taken something rich from this. I certainly have. And round of applause for Martin and Simon. Thank you.